I moved into the Maple Crest Apartments last winter. It was cheap, close to work, and honestly, I just needed to start over. I'd just gotten out of a long relationship. The kind that leaves you feeling like you've been hollowed out. The new place was small, just one bedroom, one bathroom, but it was quiet. Or at least it was supposed to be. The first night I slept there, I remember waking up around 3:17 a.m., not because of a noise exactly, but because of a feeling. You know that strange sense when something is awake nearby, even if you can't see it? At first, I thought it was my imagination. The heating pipes in old buildings click, the wood expands, all that. But this sound wasn't mechanical. It was tapping, soft, rhythmic, like someone lightly drumming their fingernails against the wall. Tap, 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 tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. I sat up in bed, heart hammering. It was coming from the wall behind my headboard, the one separating me from apartment 4B. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe my new neighbor was awake, couldn't sleep. But the tapping went on for almost 10 minutes. Always the same rhythm. Finally, I got up, grabbed my phone, and knocked back on the wall. Just 3 times, quick. Knock, knock. There was a pause. Then, from the other side, knock, knock, knock. Perfectly mirrored. That was the first night I realized whoever lived in 4B was listening. Over the next few weeks, I learned more about my new neighbor, though not from him directly. The landlord said the guy's name was Arthur, mid-40s, quiet, paid rent on time, rarely left his apartment. A bit of a night owl, the landlord said, laughing it off. That was an understatement. Every night, without fail, around 2 or 3 a.m., I'd hear Arthur's movements, footsteps pacing, cabinets opening, the faint sound of whispering. I tried to ignore it. Headphones, white noise, whatever, but sometimes the whispers sounded like my name. One night, I pressed my ear to the wall, and what I heard made my skin crawl. It wasn't words, more like breath. A slow inhale, a slower exhale, right against the other side of the plaster, as if you were matching my breathing. After that, I started sleeping on the couch. A few nights later, I came home late from work. As I walked down the dim hallway, I noticed apartment 4B's door was open. Just an inch. There was no light inside, only a thin smell of something metallic like rust or old blood. I leaned in. Arthur? No answer. Then from inside the dark room, a faint tapping started. I stepped back and hurried to my own door, slammed it shut. But the tapping followed me, through the wall, through the silence. It didn't stop until sunrise. The next morning, I went downstairs to the mailboxes. Arthur's box was overflowing, letters, flyers, even a few past due notices. That's when Mrs. Donnelly, the old woman from 2A, shuffled by. She looked at me, then at the pile of mail, and said quietly, "You know that man in 4B hasn't been here for months, right?" I froze. "What do you mean?" She lowered her voice. "He died last year. Heart attack. They found him sitting in his chair. No family came for him. The apartment was locked up for months before you moved in." I laughed, thinking she was confused, but the way her face stayed dead serious made my stomach drop. "Then, who's been in there?" She just shook her head and muttered, "Some doors shouldn't be open twice." That night, I put my ear against the wall again. Silence. For the first time in weeks. Nothing. I almost felt relieved. Until knock. Knock. 3 knocks. Exactly the rhythm I'd used the first night. And then, through the plaster, a whisper so faint I thought I imagined it. "You moved into my room." After that night, I couldn't sleep in the bedroom anymore. I started keeping the door closed, the lights on low. Every noise made me flinch, but the tapping continued, always around 3 a.m., always from 4B. It grew bolder. Sometimes it moved across the wall, following wherever I went. Finally, I decided I needed proof. I set up my phone to record audio overnight. When I listened the next morning, I almost dropped it. For 6 hours there was silence. Then, at exactly 3:17 a.m., a faint voice whispered, "Hello, can you hear me? It's cold." Then there was something else. A scrape, like furniture moving. Then heavy breathing. And finally my own voice saying, "Who's there?" The thing is, I never said that. The next day, I went to the landlord again. I told him someone was living in 4B, maybe squatting. He looked at me confused. 4B? He said, "Kid, that apartment's been empty since last March. We haven't rented it out. It's sealed for renovation," I insisted. "Then who's making those noises?" He sighed, pulled out his keyring, and said, "Fine, let's take a look." We walked up the hall. When he pushed open the door to 4B, a wave of cold air spilled out. The apartment was bare, no furniture, no carpet, just dusty floors and faint marks on the wall, except for one thing. On the wall connecting to my bedroom, there were dozens of small holes, each the size of a finger, each drilled right through the plaster from his side toward mine. The landlord stared at them and whispered, "Jesus Christ." But I barely heard him, because when I looked closer, I saw that inside each hole was something wet. Something that looked like tissue. We left and locked it back up. The landlord promised he'd have maintenance patch it in the morning. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room, lights on, trying to convince myself there was an explanation. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the tapping started again. Only this time, it wasn't from the wall. It came from inside my closet. Tap. Tap, tap. Pause. I stood up slowly, grabbed my phone light, and walked toward the sound. The tapping stopped. When I opened the closet door, cold air rushed out. There was nothing inside, just my clothes, swaying slightly, as if they'd been brushed by a hand. And then faintly from behind the drywall, "You moved into my room. Now I'm moving into yours." I moved out that weekend. Left half my stuff behind. A few weeks later, I got curious, stupid maybe. I looked up Maple Crest Apartments online. There was a listing photo for 4B. In the corner of one image, the mirror reflected part of the wall. And if you look closely enough, you can see a shadow standing behind the photographer, right where the wall meets mine. We bought the house last summer. Small town, quiet streets, a white picket fence and a backyard big enough for a garden. Everything my wife, Emma, had ever wanted. After years of renting, it finally felt like a fresh start. The neighbors seemed friendly too, the kind of people who waved as you drove by, who left Christmas cookies on your porch in December. All except for Mr. Grady, the man who lived directly behind us. He must have been in his 60s. Gray hair, always wearing the same faded overalls. The first day we moved in, he appeared at the fence just as the movers were leaving. "Welcome to the neighborhood," he said, smiling wide. The smile didn't quite reach his eyes. He handed Emma a jar of homemade jam. The label read, "From your neighbor, G." It was a nice gesture, I guess. But there was something off about him, something in the way he stared a little too long. That night, as we unpacked, Emma mentioned how he'd kept looking past her shoulder at something behind her. I laughed it off. New place jitters, maybe. But over the next few weeks, we started noticing strange things. Sometimes when we were out in the yard, I'd catch movement from the corner of my eye. I'd turn and see Mr. Grady standing in his yard, hands behind his back, watching us. He wouldn't wave, wouldn't even blink, just watched. Once, I was fixing the gutter, and when I looked down, he was there, staring straight up at me from his lawn. Didn't say a word. When I told Emma, she said, "He's just lonely. Don't make it weird." So I tried to ignore it. A few days later, we got home from the grocery store to find a small box on our porch. Inside was a disposable camera. There was a note taped to it. "You left this in your yard. Thought you'd want it back." Gee, but we didn't own a disposable camera. Emma shrugged it off, but something about the handwriting made my skin crawl. That night I drove to the pharmacy and had the photos developed. There were only 4 that came out clearly. All of them were pictures of our house. One of the front door, one of the living room window, one of the backyard, and one, taken from inside the fence, of us sleeping in bed. I didn't tell Emma. I didn't want to scare her. But I knew I had to do something. The next morning, I walked over to Mr. Grady's fence. He was already there, waiting. "Morning," he said. "Morning," I answered. "Listen, have you been on our property lately?" He frowned. "Property? No, son. I don't leave my yard much." I told him someone had been taking pictures of our house. He smiled again, that same too-wide grin, and said, "Well, that's no good. You never know who's watching these days." Then he leaned a little closer and whispered, "You should keep your blinds closed at night." That night, Emma woke me up. She said she heard something outside. We went to the window. There was movement near the fence, a flashlight beam cutting across the yard. At first, I thought it was a raccoon or maybe some teenager. But then I saw him. Mr. Grady. He was standing in the middle of our backyard, staring up at our window, holding that same disposable camera. I ran downstairs, grabbed the baseball bat from the closet, and burst out the back door. By the time I reached the yard, he was gone, but something glinted in the grass. The camera, I picked it up. It was still warm. The next morning, I went straight to his house. No answer. The blinds were drawn. I called the local sheriff, told them what happened. They promised to look into it. That evening, just as the sun went down, Emma noticed something on the fence. A new board had been nailed over one of the slats, fresh wood, darker than the rest. There was a note pinned to it with a single nail. It said, "Did you like the photos?" I ripped it down. Behind the new board, I noticed a hole, like a peephole, cut right through to our side. I pressed my eye to it, just for a second, and froze, because on the other side, staring back at me from the darkness, was an eye. Bloodshot, unblinking. I fell back, shouted for Emma. When we looked again, the hole was empty. We packed bags that night. I told her we'd leave in the morning, find a motel. But around midnight, there was a knock at the back door. 3 soft knocks. Emma whispered, "Don't open it." I didn't plan to. But then we both heard his voice, muffled, polite, "Just checking if you're all right." Then, another knock. Louder this time. "Something's wrong with your fence." I grabbed my phone to call the police, but before I could dial, the lights flickered and went out. Total darkness. I turned on the flashlight and stepped toward the back door. There was a shadow moving outside, tall and still. Then from the other side of the glass came a whisper, "You should have kept your blinds closed." I slammed the deadbolt, dragged a chair under the handle. We hid in the hallway, listening. No footsteps, no sound. Then from the kitchen, the sound of wood cracking, like something heavy was being pried apart. When I shone the flashlight toward the window, I saw what it was: a hand reaching through the slats of the fence, pulling them apart. The fingers were raw, splintered, like he'd been digging for days. I called 911. It felt like hours before the sirens arrived. When the sheriff got there, they found no one in the yard. But on the fence, carved deep into the wood, were the words, "I just wanted to see." They checked his house later that night. Mr. Grady was gone. No trace, no forwarding address, nothing, except for one last thing. In his basement, the deputies found the wall covered with photos. Every picture showed a different family that had lived in our house, dozens of them, all taken through the same hole in the fence. The last photo was of us, sleeping. We moved out 2 days later. I don't know where Mr. Grady went, but sometimes when the wind's right, I swear I still hear that faint click, the sound of a disposable camera winding somewhere in the dark. I've always hated basements. Even when I was a kid, that feeling of stale air, the hum of the house above, the way shadows gather where the light won't reach, it all made my skin crawl. But when I moved into my new place, I thought I'd finally grown out of it. The townhouse was quiet, clean, and cheap enough for someone living alone. The only downside was my neighbor, Mr. Reeves, was an older man who lived in the unit next door. He seemed harmless, polite even, but there was something about him off. The first night I met him in the hallway, he smiled too long, too still, and said, "If you hear anything strange at night, don't worry. The pipes like to talk." I laughed it off. But that line, "the pipes like to talk," stuck with me. A week later, I learned what he meant. Around midnight, as I was drifting off, I heard a low murmur coming from beneath the floor. Not the pipes, not the creaks of an old house. It was a voice, too soft to make out, but definitely human. It sounded like someone whispering a prayer or repeating a name over and over. I pressed my ear to the floor. The words became clearer. "It's not your time. Not your time. Not yet." The voice was deep, raspy, and it came from below. The next morning, I caught Mr. Reeves outside watering his plants. I asked him if he'd been in his basement late last night. He just smiled. "I told you, the pipes talk." Then he added, "It's better if you don't listen too close." That answer didn't sit right with me. That evening, I went downstairs and knocked on the wall we shared. "Hey," I said, "you up?" Silence. Then from the other side, 3 slow knocks back. Knock. Knock, knock. It was like deja vu. The rhythm felt familiar, almost like it was meant to mimic me. Over the next few nights, I started hearing more. Sometimes a soft humming. Sometimes footsteps pacing beneath the floorboards. And sometimes 2 voices whispering at once. One night, curiosity got the better of me. I slid my phone under the basement door and hit record. When I played it back, my blood ran cold. For 5 minutes there was static. Then faint words like a chant. "Down here. Down here. Down here." And then, another voice, clear, sharp, right next to the phone. "Don't look down." I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I called the property manager. I told her there were noises coming from the basement next door. She hesitated for a long time, then said quietly, "Mr. Reeves doesn't have a basement. None of those end units do." I froze. "What are you talking about?" "There's a door." "I know," she said. "It's sealed. It leads to the old foundation. That space hasn't been opened in decades." Then she added, "If you're hearing voices, you're not the first." That night, I decided to see for myself. I waited until after midnight. The lights in Reeves's house were off. I went to my basement door, turned the handle, and it opened. It wasn't locked. A wave of cold, damp air hit me. The smell of soil. Old stone. Something metallic. I aimed my flashlight down the stairs. At the bottom was a dirt floor. And along the far wall, a small opening like a crawl space that led directly toward Reeves's house. The beam of light hit something hanging there. A wind chime. Made of bones. And beneath it, carved into the wall, were words scratched into the dirt. "Not your time." I should have left. But I crawled closer. Inside the crawl space, the air grew heavy. The whispering started again, low, distant. "You shouldn't have come down." My flashlight flickered. I turned back and saw footprints in the dirt. Fresh ones. They led toward me. I scrambled backward, heart pounding. Then, from the darkness, something moved. A shape low to the ground, crawling fast. I caught a glimpse of its face before the light went out. It wasn't Reeves. It was me. I bolted upstairs, slammed the basement door, and shoved a chair against it. From below came the faint sound of knocking. 3 slow knocks. Then a voice that sounded exactly like mine whispering, "Let me in." I called 911. By the time the police arrived, the basement was silent. They found no crawl space, no wind chime, no footprints, nothing. The wall was solid concrete. And Mr. Reeves? He was gone. The police said his unit was empty. But when they checked the electrical box, they found something else. The power had been shut off for over a week. I moved out the next day. A month later, I drove by the old townhouse. It was dark, boarded up. But in the basement window, just before I turned the corner, I saw a faint glow. And inside that glow, 2 silhouettes. One of them was kneeling. The other stood behind it, whispering into its ear. If you listen close to the recording I made that night, right before the static cuts out, you can hear me whisper something. It's not my time.